historically I have been accused of, like, in pictures, not smiling.
Yeah.
And people's perception of my energy sometimes in certain settings is that I'm kind of a low key, low energy person. But I think if you watch my podcast that I've done, it's kind of the opposite. And it's because I realized I love to talk. So a podcast is like a perfect medium for me,
Yeah, I
I think.
mean, if you met some of my dearest friends and they had to summarize me, she loves a good chat and she's high in energy. So there we go. So it's going to be a great conversation today.
Cool.
Amazing. Well, on that note, welcome to A Curious Coach. It is an absolute pleasure, John, to have you on board. So I want to hand it straight over to you to introduce yourself. What's happened in your life? Tell us about your personal journey that led you to where you are today.
All right. Well, first, thanks for having me on. I've been looking forward to this. And this is my version of excited. I always tell people I teach communication skills. So one of the things that I teach people is enthusiasm is important, but you have to do you. So Tony Robbins' version of enthusiasm is pumping his fists and jumping up and down. Mine is much more subdued, and that's fine. They all work. So as I mentioned, I develop and deliver training programs primarily for accounting and finance professionals, and primarily dealing in communication and other people's skills. And the way that I got there was the way I explained it is I kind of came in through the back door. So I was working doing finance and accounting consulting work that was pretty much the same type of work that I did when I worked for some big companies, but I was just doing it on my own. And someone approached me through LinkedIn, and they said, we have this conference that we're doing. It's this multi-day conference, and it's all about budgeting and forecasting. And that seems right up your alley. Would you be interested in speaking? And I thought, well, I don't know how this works. I'd never spoken at something like that before. So we went back and forth, and he kind of filled me in more. And I thought, okay, this sounds like a good, actually, I really thought about it more as a business opportunity, because the people attending the conference sounded like perfect prospects for my consulting work that I was doing at the time. And the topic I was given was actually really dry and technical. Wasn't real excited about the topic. It's demand forecasting. And if you don't know what that is, it's every bit as dry as it sounds, and actually a little more. So anyway, I spoke at that conference. I really enjoyed it. And I was kind of crossing my fingers thinking, I think it went well, but I'm not really sure. And then when the conference organizer got back to me, he said, hey, your scores were really good. Everybody liked you. Would you like to do it again? So it turns out this company did these conferences all over the country, all throughout the year. And so that year I probably did a half a dozen for them. And I kind of got bitten by the bug. I realized I like speaking in front of groups. I like doing training. And what led me to where I am now is, as I was going to these conferences, I noticed the bulk of the content of the curriculum at these conferences was technical skills. And I didn't see or hear anybody talking about people skills, communication skills. And so I proposed it to someone, and they reluctantly let me do it once. And then it just kind of started to gain some traction. And so I started to focus almost exclusively on teaching communication and other people skills. And so I'd say between 2011 and today, 100% of the revenue for my business in 2011 came from consulting work, and a smattering from speaking. And between 2011 and today, it just kind of got to the point where I realized I can just focus on this full time and not do the technical stuff, because I didn't enjoy any of that stuff anyway. I feel like that's my mission, is to give out information. So before I got into speaking, so 2011, I was very frustrated with what I was doing, because it was very technical. The nature of the work that I did, a typical project would go something like this. Let's say you were the client. The conversation would start around, hey, I understand what you do in this area. Think we could really use your help. Here's our issue. Can you help us? Yes, I think I can help you, and here's what that would look like. Excuse me. We go ahead and sign a contract, and typically I would gather a bunch of information from the client, ask a handful of questions, and then I would kind of go away and crunch numbers in a spreadsheet for hours and hours, sometimes days or weeks, depending on the scope of the project. Then I would go back to the client and say, here's a solution. It was this very technical solution that typically was manifested in a bunch of reports with lots of numbers. We discuss those, and it would be typically a very short conversation. And then sometimes there would be a little bit beyond that where I would do a little bit of hand-holding in how to do a few processes. And other than that, that would be the project. So it was a couple of conversations at the beginning and at the end, typically, and then long periods of me in a spreadsheet. And as you may have ascertained from our previous conversations, I like people. I like talking to people. And so working in spreadsheets constantly with my head down, focused on numbers, it almost felt like punishment. And I hesitated to use the word punishment because it sounds strong. But in hindsight, I realized if I were sitting back and thinking, how could I punish John? He did something bad. I want to punish John. What can I do to him? I'm going to sit him in a room by himself, not let him talk to anyone, and just make him focus on highly technical, complicated things that don't really stimulate him and he doesn't enjoy it. I'm going to make him do that for hours and hours on end. Hey, let's add some time pressure too. That would almost be like a formula to punish me. And that was the nature of my work. And so the way I got into that work when I was doing consulting, I did that type of work for some big companies, the last of which was AutoNation. So I don't know if you have AutoNation in your country, probably not. It's a US-based company. In the US, they are the largest, at least when I worked there, they were the largest retailer of cars. So they had these giant car lots, new cars, used cars, all that stuff. I worked for them for about a year, and my job was very much what I just described. My responsibility was a 5-year strategic plan for their largest business unit. And so I crunched numbers all day long, doing budgets and forecasts for every bit of that business. And for about a year, I would tell my bosses, these numbers don't make any sense. The numbers that we're projecting are not profitable. And every day, my bosses would tell me, don't be so negative. They'll figure it out. They being the CEO. And so about a year later, they finally realized, oh, he was right. This dog doesn't hunt. So they shut down that entire business unit, and me and 400 and something other people were out of a job all in one day. And fortunately, because of the type of work that I did, I had to interact with the heads of departments throughout the company. So they hired me back as a consultant to do work similar to what I was doing, but on a consulting basis. So they kind of still needed my skill set, but that whole unit that I worked in disappeared. It just got shut down. And as it turns out, one of the biggest reasons they picked me for that project was not primarily my technical skills. They did need someone with a small set of technical skills in accounting, but the majority of the job was people skills. It was dealing with people from a mechanic to an administrative assistant, all the way up to like the CEO of this Fortune 500 company. And they realized that past year, that was what I did day in and day out. And that apparently was hard to find. People that could deal equally well and not make someone that's an administrative assistant feel talked down to, and also not be intimidated by a senior vice president or a CEO.
I mean, that's certainly a skill. Again, I can only turn it onto my personal account in terms of that intimidation. It's so easy to go into a role that you have a skill set for and you're very good at that role. To then be able to use that skill and be able to confidently use those, your skill in how to speak to people at different levels. I'm inspired by that because I know as soon as, it's ridiculous, isn't it? As soon as there's an idea of hierarchy, I suddenly feel like this unconfident individual that suddenly doesn't know what she's going on about. Do you ever feel that when you're in your role? Or do you feel like you're so passionate or so good at what you do that actually you can really channel that energy?
So you mean in my current role, what I'm doing today?
Well, I suppose I'm combining the two because people skills has led you to where you are today, right? So
Yeah.
that
So,
kind of strength.
well, when I used to do consulting work, I did still feel intimidated at times. Uh, Not so much. So when I worked at AutoNation, I was super intimidated most of the time because for perspective, I think I was 20, 27, 28 at the time. And I was a manager, which in the hierarchy, you want to talk hierarchies, there's like a financial analyst, a senior financial analyst, and then a manager. So it's a relatively low level position. I reported to a guy who was a director, then there was a senior director, then a vice president, a senior vice president, an executive vice. So I was pretty low down on the totem pole. So much so that I had an office that was so small I needed to walk outside to change my mind. I did not have an administrative assistant. I shared an administrative assistant with 5 other people, which meant, yeah, good luck, don't bother.
Yeah.
So I typed very well as a result of that, which actually ended up being a good thing. So I was pretty intimidated for a long time in that role. And since I went out on my own, what I realized is the skill set that I had was actually at a much higher level than I realized for a person my age. So I had a lot of experience crammed into a very short time frame in the first 5 years of my career. But I didn't realize that until I started getting more exposure to other people, because that was just my norm. I worked in an environment where the other people I worked with that were my peers, I had imposter syndrome around them. Like I thought I put them up here compared to me. I had a bachelor's degree. Almost everybody else in the department had an MBA, most of them from Princeton or Wharton or, some top tier MBA program. And when I finally went out on my own and I started having these one-on-one meetings with CEOs and CFOs and senior level people in these big organizations, within a few minutes, I realized I can hold my own with these guys. There's a thin slice of things that they know intimately well, way better than I do. But that's because it's their company and their industry, and almost nobody else could walk in and know more than them, regardless of their background. So in what I do now, the only time I feel intimidated is when I feel unprepared, which is very infrequent.
Yeah, that's some really interesting and great responses there. One with the imposter syndrome. I know that there will be people listening who go, oh, that imposter syndrome seeps in on a daily basis. And that, you mentioned there that it was only when you stepped outside on your own and you were like, right, I can do this, I can have these meetings, and that realization that you're never going to know as much as the person that's the founder, the CEO of a company, because it's theirs at the end of the day. Was there a particular moment where it was like, aha, okay, there's the realization? Is there a pinpoint moment, or did you just through practice realize, okay, that imposter syndrome is in my head, I'm unprepared, and if I prepare myself and understand, I will never be on the same page as them because it's not mine? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I don't think there was one aha moment. I think there have been specific aha moments, but I don't feel like there was one that stood out as like the moment where I just went, oh my gosh, this is why I've been feeling this way. Although, actually, now that I say that, you're reminding me of the first large conference I spoke at. So those conferences I was telling you about, those were typically 50 to 60 people in a room. In 2013, I think it was, I was invited to speak at a conference, and in just the room I spoke in, there were over 200 people. And there were like 6,000 people at that conference. It was like a multi-day conference. So people would be in different rooms at the same time in different classes. And so I spoke at the Mandalay Bay Resort in Vegas, which is a pretty big venue if you've not been there. And the keynote speaker at that event was Colin Powell. So I thought, holy crap, I'm on the same agenda as Colin Powell. I did my thing and I thought it went okay, but I was a little nervous. And on the flight back, I happened to be sitting next to someone. We got into a conversation, talked the entire flight. And it turns out this guy was a CPA, which I used to work at a CPA firm. And he told me that the majority of his clients were celebrities, like big name, A-list Hollywood people. And he had imposter syndrome. And this was a guy, I'll be 55 this month. This was a guy who was around my age and had a super successful CPA practice. And he was telling me he had imposter syndrome. And his wife was sitting right next to him. And she started telling me stories about all these big name people that were so impressed with her husband and what a great job he did. And yet he's telling me like, yeah, I just don't feel, why are they coming to me? Like they could go to anyone, you know? And it made me realize that was one of the bigger aha moments is here's this guy who's had way more experience with bigger things than I have. And he has imposter syndrome.
Yeah. And I think it's so important to put it out there that actually everyone does, no matter who they are, right? So thank you so much for sharing. And that aha moment, what I liked is it kind of took you back to that moment sitting next to a gentleman who was sharing that story. I want to just thread through when we cover your career and your life so far. What would you say your greatest barriers and successes have been on that journey, would you say?
My mindset. So when I started working for myself as a consultant, it was just happenstance, right? I got laid off from that company and I was literally just sitting at home trying to figure out what in the world my next move was going to be. And the phone rang and it was someone from that company I'd just been laid off from offering me an opportunity to come back as a consultant. So that just kind of fell in my lap. And after that project was done, I had a series of things fall into my lap just from people that I knew from previous jobs that hired me for different things. And once those started to slow down, I started to realize, holy crap, I have to go out and find business. And so I realized, John, you're a salesman and I hate salespeople and I hate selling. So I had to figure that whole thing out about getting good at sales. And as I started to take classes and get more experience with it, I realized I had objections in my head that other people didn't have that were standing in my way. There's a great old sales trainer named Tom Hopkins. And he says, I always tell salespeople that there are three things that I need you to do to be a successful salesperson. I need you to create interest, overcome objections, and close the sale. He said, unfortunately, what most salespeople do is they overcome interest, they create objections, and they never close the sale. And I realized I do that all the time. I'm talking to someone trying to get them interested in hiring me, and my imposter syndrome, excuse me, and my own internal dialogue is, I'm not sure if I can handle this project. I don't know if they're going to hire me. What do they think of me? All these negative thoughts. And I would project that. That stuff oozes out of our pores. I think too many people don't realize how much stuff that goes on at a subconscious level just comes out whether we like it or not in our body, mostly in our body language. Right? So I'd be talking to these people and my guess is my shoulders were probably tense. I was probably breathing shallow. My head was probably down a little bit. I was probably oozing all this body language that made them think, this guy doesn't seem very confident. I wonder why. And that same set of, I call it tapes because I'm old and I grew up with cassette tapes, but these tapes that I was playing in my head of all of these negative things, I think it's an ongoing thing even to this day to replace those with more positive things.
Interesting. And yeah, so true. I mean, the mind and its voices are quite something. And I suppose all through this conversation we've said the word imposter syndrome, and again it becomes mindset and the stories that we tell ourselves. So again, thank you for being honest about that. What would you say your skill is? What was the, or what's your go-to when you hear those moments of doubt and insecurity and imposter coming through, to show people that you are confident, you do know what to do. You know, we have to put on this front when we're trying to sell something. What's your go-to? What do you do to try and go, you need to just be quiet thoughts because I've got to get this, you know, I've got a life I want to live and I know I have the skills to conquer it all.
So for me, I think the biggest thing to quiet those demons is preparation. Um, when I feel less confident and when those negative voices start to seem louder, I have noticed for me personally, it has been when I have felt unprepared. And so I get into a situation and realize, whoops, I didn't think of the question that person just asked. Now I don't feel confident because I hadn't prepared enough for that. But there have been times also where I'm in the middle of a conversation, somebody asks something that I don't know the answer to, and in the moment I have like this little minor panic. And I think, oh no, I'm supposed to have the answer. I'm the expert. And the thing that has helped me in those situations is to realize nobody has the answer to everything. The most expert of experts will make errors and not know from time to time. Just be honest and let people know, I'm not really sure the answer to that question, but let's follow up afterwards and I'll make sure I get you an answer. Because we can't know everything, but it's hard to admit that sometimes.
I think a lot of the time, I think on a global level, society, the word no carries such a negative connotation, doesn't it? And we need to start befriending it a little bit more and saying, I don't know. And it's okay to say, I don't know. And no, I can't do that at this moment in time. Can you teach me? Can you help me? We get taught that that's not a strength, but just listening to you there, it clearly is. As long as we're honest with the reality that we're in, because the last thing you want is to ever take someone down a journey that's not going to get them the result that they need, and it doesn't support your journey either.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah. So on that, you've got an audience that are listening who are relating to the imposter syndrome, to the idea that unless they plan, I know if I haven't planned, even when I do plan, the panic and the stress that comes through my body still. What message, if there's someone listening going, I'm in this job that isn't inspiring me, it's draining my energy, it is lonely. Yes, okay, I'm good at it. It's not where I want to be. Their imposter syndrome follows them everywhere. What advice would you give to people who just want to take a step in a new direction, that need to learn how to quiet their mind? What advice do you have? It doesn't have to be around those areas, just advice to give to an audience to be their best selves.
The sooner you can sit down and have what I call a come to Jesus meeting with yourself and figure out two main things. What things am I good at that I enjoy spending time on? And it's important that it's both of those, because I was relatively good at math and Excel and all those skills that my job required, but I didn't enjoy them, right? So what are some strengths that I have where I'm good at it and I enjoy doing it? And then what are things that people are willing to pay someone else to do for them? And then find out where those overlap. So if you picture a Venn diagram of those two circles, where one is stuff I like that I'm good at, one is what people will pay for, where those overlap is where you should focus. But you can't focus there if you've never done that exercise. And I think many people never do that exercise. There was a military veteran that I spoke with last week. And when I asked him what some of their biggest challenges are when they leave the military, he said a lot of them, what they're taught is let's map what you did in the military to jobs outside of the military and just match those up. And then we'll get you interviews at those types of jobs. And they never stop and ask, oh, by the way, you spent 20 years doing X in the military. Did you actually like doing that? Because lots of times in the military, you get voluntold, right? Oh, well, this is what we need, so that's what you're going to do. And they just do that for their entire career. They never stop and ask the question, what do you actually like doing? And so that's a big thing that he's now helping military veterans with, that I'm hoping to work with him a bit to help them with that. But figure those two things out and where they overlap. And if you can focus on that little slice where they overlap in that Venn diagram, you'll be doing stuff that you're good at, that you enjoy. That will at least minimize the imposter syndrome, because you'll be spending time on things you're already good at, and you're getting better at them every day because you're spending time on them.
Love that advice. And I think that's so true. You know, it's something that, you know, in a dream world, actually, as a young person should be taught, instead of trying to find a career where it's financially driven and because society tells you that's the route to go. And I think that's such a golden, and I will add that Venn diagram to the end of this video so people have the videos, the visual as well. But I think there's such power in combining the two, because that's reality. You can have the things that you're good at and you're passionate about, but at the end of the day, we live in a world where we do need financial gain. So why not bring them together? But in that process, you're enjoying what you're doing. So thank you so much. So I have a little question.
Okay.
If I was to ask you in a year's time about your passions and your finances, where would you like to say you'll be? What's that green space? What's that middle ground for you? What does that look like?
Spending a lot more of my time creating and less time on all of the things that are required to support that, which involves finding the right people to be able to delegate some of that stuff to. Because I have, for a very long time, worked for myself and mostly by myself. And that's been good in many ways, but I'm making a shift in my business where I'm creating more content that doesn't require me to deliver it live, right? So like recorded courses that I'll put up online that anyone can access 24/7, 365. And so when I get the things in place to have the people to help me with the things I'm not very good at to do that kind of stuff, then I can focus a lot more time on just developing killer training content that's actually fun for people. Because that's the other thing with training, is a lot of people, they feel like they're going to the dentist when they do training. And I'm looking to make mine what a lot of people call like edutainment. And you will see, when you see my recorded course, you'll see exactly what I mean within like a minute or two.
Brilliant. Well, I'm excited, and I know that it will benefit a lot of people across the world. And I'm going to put you as international to provide your services 100%. So thank you very much, John, for coming on and just sharing your story and just showing people that you can change your reality and that you can bring your skills and earn from it and create a life that you desire. And I promise that all your details will be in the comment box below, so people can contact you and connect with you. But thank you just for coming on board and sharing your story with us.
Thanks for inviting me. Thanks for having me on the show. I appreciate it.